Hello, my name is Andrew Tucker and I'm speaking to you from The Hague in the Netherlands. I've been asked to speak to you about this question of annexation. Earlier this year, 2020, the Israeli government announced under Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu that it intends to apply Israeli law and sovereignty to parts of the so-called West Bank. Specifically, the Israeli government said it's going to apply Israeli sovereignty over the Jordan Valley and over the settlement blocks. Settlement blocks are those areas where Israelis are living in what has become known as the West Bank or occupied territories. The world community threw up its arms in horror and almost with one voice said this is illegal. Israel has no right unilaterally to apply its sovereignty over these areas because they don't belong to Israel. In fact, they belong to the Palestinian people. I think this is a generally widely perceived position that these territories are Palestinian. They're not Jewish, they're not Israeli at all. Now, I think international law, in fact, and I would argue, does not prohibit Israel from doing this. I'm not saying it would be wise to do it. It wouldn't be necessarily the right thing to do at this time or in the way that Israel's proposing to do it. By the way, it's off the table at the moment anyway because of the agreements Israel has entered into recently with a number of Arab states. But the issue will come back, no doubt, at some point in time. And so the question really is, who is the owner of these territories? To whom do these territories belong? Now, let's understand here that we're talking about what to the Jewish people are known as Judea and Samaria. This is the mountain country which runs down from north to south of the heartland of Palestine. Now, to the Jewish people, this is the very historical and religious heartland of the Jewish people. And while politically many Israelis are very much in favor of a two-state solution for giving the Palestinians a state in these so-called occupied territories, nevertheless, historically and religiously, they belong very closely to the Jewish people. As a matter of international law, there are three issues here. First of all, the principle under international law that prohibits states from acquiring territory by the use of force. That's the first argument that's used to say that Israel is prohibited from taking this step. Now, Israel argues, and I would argue validly, I think it's a fair and a reasonable argument, and stronger, I believe, than any other argument, that these territories belonged to the State of Israel because the State of Israel emerged out of the Mandate for Palestine. Just as many states in the world, perhaps even the majority, have grown out of what were previously mandates or colonies or trusts, so the State of Israel in 1948 was born out of the Mandate for Palestine, which had been created after the First World War in 1922, when the fallen Ottoman Empire territories were divided into mandates. The Arabs acquired eventually sovereignty over the vast majority of the Middle East, and the Jewish people were recognized as having a right to re-establish their homeland in the heartland of Palestine, at least in the western part of Palestine, west of the Jordan River. And the Arabs rejected every offer that was on the table right from that time of 1922 to have an Arab state and a Jewish state west of the Jordan River. They've rejected many two-state solutions, the most important being the partition plan in 1947. And Israel says, well, we declared statehood in 1948 on the territory of the mandate. And the principle under international law of uti possidetis juris, which has governed many emerging states under international law, applies to Israel to mean that Israel has sovereignty. Now, of course, a lot of water has passed under the bridge since 1967, since Israel took back control of these territories, and Israel decided at that time not to apply its sovereignty. Now that has consequences. They wanted to negotiate for peace with their Arab neighbors, and they did so successfully with Egypt and Jordan, and with both those states it has peace agreements. And now Israel is negotiating with the Palestinians for Palestinian autonomy. There's no doubt the Palestinians have a right to self-determination, but I believe that right must be exercised, can only be exercised in negotiation with the State of Israel, which has a right to secure borders, a right to territorial integrity, and a right to exist free from threats of force. And very relevant to this is the fact that Israel is operating in a very hostile environment. The West Bank is not just an area that potentially belongs to the Palestinians. This is really the buffer zone between Israel and potentially very hostile Jordan, Syria just to the north of Jordan, and Lebanon, where Hezbollah, which is an extension, a proxy of Iran, is operating and threatening Israel's existence every day. These territories are essential for Israel to have control of them if it is to survive. That's one of the most fundamental reasons why Israel has a right to negotiate about where its borders are and how Palestinian autonomy is to be achieved. So to conclude, Israel has a right here, which I believe is a valid right, both historically and legally, to be heard. The international law issues are very complicated and I believe are not absolutely clear. And of course, law is just one aspect of many which has to be taken into account. You'll find much more information on our website, www.think.info. And I hope you'll find this helpful as we wrestle with these questions. And we all look forward to a solution of this conflict whereby Jews and non-Jews will be blessed in this land and all will prosper based on cooperation and mutual respect. Thank you very much.